The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Elite Martial Arts Academy, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Marcus Chen adjusted his pristine black belt for the third time, his eyes scanning the dojo with the satisfaction of ownership. At 28, he had built this place into the most prestigious fighting school in the wealthy district of Makati. The sound of students practicing their forms echoed off the mirrored walls, a symphony of discipline that fed his growing ego. Fresh flowers adorned the reception area, and the scent of expensive cleaning products masked any trace of honest sweat. This wasn't just a dojo, it was Marcus's temple, and he was its undisputed god. His reputation preceded him wherever he went in Manila's martial arts circles. Marcus had earned his black belt in 3 different disciplines before turning 25, a feat that newspapers loved to celebrate. Corporate executives paid premium rates to train under him, drawn by his technical precision and ruthless teaching methods. He demanded perfection from every student, accepting nothing less than flawless execution of every technique. The walls displayed dozens of tournament trophies and framed newspaper clippings that chronicled his rise to prominence. His Instagram account boasted 50,000 followers who hung on every video demonstration he posted. Success had become his drug, and humility was a weakness he'd long since abandoned. The late afternoon training session was Marcus's favorite time to showcase his superiority. Advanced students gathered in the main training area, their movements sharp and calculated under his watchful eye. He walked among them like a general inspecting troops, correcting postures with sharp commands that brooked no argument. The younger students watched from the sidelines with a mixture of admiration and fear. His teaching style was theatrical, every correction delivered with the dramatic flair of someone who believed his own legend. The air conditioning hummed quietly, maintaining the perfect temperature for his privileged clientele. Today felt like any other day in his carefully constructed world of control and dominance. Marcus had no idea that within the next hour, his perfectly ordered universe would collide with a force that would shake the very foundations of everything he believed about strength, respect, and true martial arts mastery. The dojo's heavy glass doors would soon open to admit someone whose quiet presence would challenge every assumption he'd built his reputation upon. The afternoon light continued to stream through the windows, illuminating a space where pride was about to meet its match. His black belt felt heavier around his waist, though he couldn't yet understand why. The stage was set for a confrontation that would become the stuff of legend in Manila's fighting community, and Marcus Chen, for all his skill and arrogance, was completely unprepared for what was walking through his door. Queen Pacquiao pushed through the heavy glass doors of Elite Martial Arts Academy, her worn sneakers silent against the polished marble entrance. At 19, she carried herself with the understated confidence that came from growing up in a household where humility was valued above all else. Her simple black training clothes contrasted sharply with the designer athletic wear of the other students scattered throughout the reception area. She had driven her modest Honda Civic across the city, leaving behind the familiar streets of General Santos for this gleaming temple of martial arts. The receptionist barely looked up from her manicured nails, assuming Queen was just another walk-in student from a less affluent neighborhood. Queen's eyes took in the expensive decor and trophy displays with quiet observation, neither impressed nor intimidated. This was just another dojo, another step in her personal journey to understand the fighting arts that had shaped her family's destiny. Her father had taught her that true strength was measured not in trophies or social media followers, but in the character displayed when facing adversity. Queen had grown up watching Manny's training sessions in their garage gym, absorbing lessons about dedication and respect that no amount of money could purchase. She moved with the fluid grace of someone raised around professional athletes, her movements economical and purposeful. The other students glanced at her curiously, their whispered conversations creating a backdrop of judgment and assumption. Queen's phone buzzed with a text from her father asking about her day, but she slipped it back into her pocket without responding. She preferred to handle her own challenges, a trait inherited from both parents who had fought their way up from nothing. Her presence in this upscale dojo was not about proving anything to anyone. It was about learning and growing. The training area buzzed with activity as advanced students performed complex combinations under the guidance of assistant instructors. Queen watched their techniques with the analytical eye of someone who had been around elite fighters her entire life. Their movements were technically proficient, but lacked the soul and purpose she had observed in her father's training partners. She noticed how some students seemed more concerned with looking impressive than developing genuine skill. The mirrors reflected a dozen versions of manufactured perfection, each student carefully aware of their appearance. Queen had come here seeking authentic instruction, hoping to find teachers who understood that martial arts was about more than physical dominance. The irony was not lost on her that she was searching for something her own home had always provided. As she approached the front desk to inquire about trial classes, Queen carried with her the quiet dignity of someone raised to treat all people with respect, regardless of their status or achievements. Her surname meant nothing to her in this moment. She was simply a young woman seeking to test herself against new challenges. The afternoon sun created geometric patterns on the training mats, and the sound of students practicing their forms filled the air with focused energy. She had no way of knowing that her presence would soon ignite a confrontation that would reveal the true character of everyone involved. Queen's journey into this dojo was about to become a defining moment, not just for herself, but for a man whose arrogance was about to collide with a legacy built on genuine strength and unwavering principle. Marcus Chen emerged from his private office like a predator sensing fresh prey, his black belt pristine against his expensive GI. He had noticed the new girl through the glass partition, her simple clothes and unassuming demeanor marking her as someone from outside his usual clientele. His assistant instructor whispered something about a walk-in wanting information about classes, but Marcus saw an opportunity for demonstration. The advanced students had paused their training to watch, creating an audience that fed his need for validation. Queen stood at the reception desk with patient composure, unaware that she had just become the focus of unwanted attention. Marcus approached with the calculated swagger of someone accustomed to being the center of every room. This was his domain, and every person who entered would learn to recognize his authority. "So you think you want to learn real martial arts?" Marcus announced loudly enough for the entire dojo to hear his words. His voice carried the condescending tone of someone addressing a child, each syllable dripping with assumed superiority. Queen turned to face him with calm eyes, neither intimidated nor impressed by his theatrical entrance. "I've been training since I was young," she replied simply, her voice steady and respectful. Marcus laughed, the sound echoing off the mirrored walls as his students gathered closer to witness the spectacle. "Training where? In some garage with YouTube videos?" he mocked, drawing snickers from several students who fed off their instructor's cruelty. The afternoon light seemed to dim as the atmosphere in the dojo shifted from professional instruction to public humiliation. Queen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she maintained her composure with the discipline instilled by years of watching her father handle far worse provocations. "I'd like to observe a class first, if that's possible," she said, refusing to rise to his obvious bait. Marcus circled her like a shark, his movements exaggerated for the benefit of his watching students. "Observation is for spectators," he declared with theatrical authority. "Here we believe in testing what someone actually brings to the mat." The other students formed a loose circle, some uncomfortable with their instructor's behavior but too intimidated to speak. Queen recognized the setup, but felt trapped by her own politeness and the growing crowd of onlookers. The tension in the room was palpable, fed by Marcus's need to assert dominance over someone he perceived as beneath his status. "Tell you what," Marcus continued, his voice gaining momentum as he sensed his audience's attention. "Let's see if this training you mentioned means anything against real technique." He gestured toward the main mat with exaggerated flourish, his black belt seeming to grow heavier with each word. Queen realized she was being cornered into a confrontation she hadn't sought, but backing down now would mean accepting the humiliation he was intent on delivering. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the training area as students whispered excitedly about the impromptu demonstration. Marcus had successfully transformed a simple inquiry about classes into a public spectacle designed to showcase his superiority. Neither he nor his watching students had any idea they were about to witness something that would fundamentally change their understanding of strength, respect, and the true meaning of martial arts mastery. Queen stepped onto the mat with reluctant resolve, her bare feet finding purchase on the polished surface as Marcus's students formed an eager circle. The afternoon light streaming through the windows seemed harsher now, illuminating what was about to become a moment that would define everyone present. Marcus rolled his shoulders theatrically, his black belt catching the light as he assumed his fighting stance with practiced arrogance. "Don't worry, I'll go easy on you," he announced to his audience, drawing more uncomfortable laughter from students who sensed something wrong but lacked the courage to intervene. Queen bowed respectfully, honoring the traditions her father had taught her, even in this hostile environment. The sound of traffic outside seemed to fade as the dojo held its collective breath. What Marcus intended as a simple demonstration of dominance was about to become something far more significant. The initial exchange revealed Queen's genuine skill as she moved with fluid precision, deflecting Marcus's attacks while maintaining perfect defensive positioning. Her footwork was subtle but effective, trained by years of watching and learning from world-class fighters in her family's humble gym. Marcus's confidence faltered briefly as he realized this wasn't going to be the easy victory he had orchestrated for his audience. His technique remained sharp, but frustration began to creep into his movements as Queen consistently avoided his attempts at domination. The watching students murmured among themselves, recognizing that their instructor was facing unexpected resistance. Marcus's pride demanded a decisive victory, and his desperation grew with each failed attempt to overwhelm his opponent. The respectful bow Queen had offered at the beginning now seemed like mockery of his assumed superiority. Driven by wounded ego and the need to maintain his reputation before his paying students, Marcus abandoned technique for brute force. He lunged forward with reckless aggression, managing to catch Queen in a rear naked choke that relied more on surprise than skill. His grip tightened around her neck with the cruel satisfaction of someone proving a point through domination rather than demonstration. Queen's eyes widened as she struggled against the hold, her hands clawing at his forearm while her vision began to blur. The watching students shifted uncomfortably, some calling for Marcus to release the hold, as it became clear this had crossed the line from sparring into assault. Marcus's face flushed with exertion and vindication, his chokehold tightening as he whispered, "This is what real training looks like." The dojo fell silent, except for Queen's labored breathing and the sound of Marcus's ragged exhalation. Time seemed suspended, as Queen's strength began to fade, her movements becoming weaker against Marcus's iron grip around her throat. The afternoon sun continued to stream through the windows, indifferent to the violence unfolding beneath its light. Several students stepped forward, their voices raised in concern, but Marcus was lost in his moment of perceived triumph. Queen's phone, forgotten in her gym bag near the edge of the mat, began to buzz with an incoming call from a contact labeled simply Papa. The irony was lost on everyone present that help was literally trying to reach her while she fought for consciousness. Marcus finally released the hold when Queen went limp, letting her drop to the mat like a discarded training dummy. His breathing was heavy with exertion and satisfaction, completely unaware that he had just made the gravest mistake of his martial arts career. Queen sat against the mirrored wall of the dojo, her throat raw and her pride wounded more than her body as Marcus basked in his hollow victory. The other students had dispersed awkwardly, some helping her to the side, while others pretended nothing unusual had happened. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her gym bag, the adrenaline from the confrontation still coursing through her system. The missed call notification on her phone showed 3 attempts from Papa, each one a reminder of the world beyond this toxic environment. She knew she should call him back immediately, but part of her wanted to handle this situation on her own terms. The afternoon light seemed dimmer now, filtered through her anger and humiliation at being treated like a training dummy. Marcus continued his victory lap among his students, oblivious to the storm he had just unleashed. Taking a shaky breath, Queen stepped outside the dojo into the humid Manila afternoon and dialed her father's number with fingers that still bore the marks of her struggle. "Anak, I was worried when you didn't answer," came the familiar voice that had comforted her through countless childhood fears and adolescent struggles. Manny Pacquiao's tone carried the gentle concern of a father who had learned to worry quietly about his children's safety in an increasingly dangerous world. Queen's voice caught slightly as she began to explain what had happened, her usual composure cracking under the weight of both physical and emotional trauma. The busy street noise of Makati provided a backdrop to her whispered account of Marcus's unprovoked aggression. Her father listened without interruption, his silence growing more ominous with each detail she shared. The protective instinct that had driven him through 8 weight divisions was stirring to life. "He put his hands around your throat?" Manny's voice remained controlled, but Queen could hear the steel beneath his calm exterior. She had witnessed this transformation before, the shift from gentle father to the focused intensity that had made him a legend in the ring. "Papa, I'm okay, really," she tried to reassure him, but they both knew that wasn't the point anymore. This wasn't about her physical condition. This was about respect, family honor, and the responsibility every martial artist bore to protect rather than abuse their skills. The traffic sound seemed to fade as Queen realized her father was no longer just listening. He was planning. His next words carried the weight of decades spent defending not just titles, but principles. "Send me the address, Anak. Papa needs to have a conversation with this teacher." Queen felt a mixture of relief and apprehension as she shared the dojo's location, knowing that her father's version of a conversation would likely become the stuff of legend. The afternoon sun beat down on the busy Manila street as she ended the call, aware that she had just set in motion events that would forever change Elite Martial Arts Academy. Inside the dojo, Marcus continued his celebration, completely unaware that his actions had attracted the attention of someone whose reputation was built on far more than tournament trophies and social media followers. The gentleman who had raised Queen with love and humility was about to reveal why he was considered one of the most dangerous fighters who had ever lived. Time was running out for Marcus's world of manufactured superiority, and the real test of his martial arts philosophy was walking through Manila traffic toward his front door. The afternoon was about to become far more educational than anyone at Elite Martial Arts Academy could have imagined. The atmosphere inside Elite Martial Arts Academy had shifted dramatically in the 30 minutes following Marcus's brutal display of dominance over Queen. Several students huddled near the water fountain, their voices hushed as they replayed what they had witnessed with growing discomfort. Sarah Martinez, a brown belt who had trained at the dojo for 2 years, couldn't shake the image of Queen's desperate struggle against the chokehold. "That wasn't sparring," she whispered to her training partner, her voice carrying a tremor of recognition that something fundamental had been violated. The younger students avoided eye contact with their instructor, suddenly uncertain about the man they had been taught to revere without question. Marcus paced the main floor with nervous energy, his earlier triumph already souring into anxiety as he noticed the change in his students' demeanor. The mirrors that usually reflected his authority now seemed to show only the doubt creeping across every face in the room. James Chen, no relation to Marcus despite the shared surname, pulled out his phone and began typing the name Queen Pacquiao into the search engine with curiosity that quickly turned to shock. His face went pale as the results populated. Images of a young woman at boxing events standing beside one of the most recognizable faces in Philippine sports history. "Guys," he called softly to his nearby training partners, his voice barely above a whisper as the magnitude of the situation began to dawn on him. The other students gathered around his phone screen, their expressions shifting from confusion to disbelief as they processed what they were seeing. Marcus had just physically assaulted the daughter of Manny Pacquiao, a man whose name was synonymous with Filipino pride and legendary fighting prowess. The afternoon training session had transformed into something far more significant than anyone had realized. Their instructor's moment of dominance was about to become a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked arrogance. Word spread through the dojo like wildfire as students shared the revelation with growing alarm and fascination. The advanced practitioners who had witnessed the chokehold now understood they had been present for what might become a defining moment in Philippine martial arts history. Marcus remained oblivious to his students' discovery, still basking in his perceived victory while completely unaware of the storm gathering around him. "Do you think she'll tell her father?" whispered Elena Rodriguez, a purple belt whose voice carried both fear and anticipation. The question hung in the air like incense, heavy with implications that reached far beyond their comfortable training environment. Some students began quietly packing their gear, suddenly reluctant to be associated with what had transpired. The dojo's expensive equipment and pristine appearance seemed less impressive now, overshadowed by the growing realization that they had all witnessed something that would have consequences far beyond these mirrored walls. The late afternoon sun cast longer shadows across the training mats as students exchanged nervous glances and whispered conversations about what might happen next. Marcus's black belt seemed less significant now, diminished by the growing understanding that rank and reputation meant nothing when measured against authentic character and real-world consequences. The trophy cases that lined the walls appeared almost mocking in their gleaming perfection, symbols of achievements that paled beside the legacy of the man whose daughter had just been attacked in their presence. Several students discreetly Googled videos of Manny Pacquiao's greatest fights, watching in awe as they realized the caliber of warrior their instructor had unknowingly provoked. The afternoon training session was supposed to end with the usual bow and dismissal, but instead concluded with the uncomfortable recognition that they had all become unwilling participants in a story that was just beginning to unfold. Marcus continued his oblivious routine, completely unaware that his carefully constructed world was about to collide with a force that would test everything he believed about strength, respect, and the true meaning of martial arts mastery. The heavy glass doors of Elite Martial Arts Academy swung open with quiet authority as a figure in simple athletic wear stepped into the pristine reception area. Manny Pacquiao moved with the understated presence of someone who had learned that true power never needed to announce itself. His worn training shoes made no sound against the polished marble, a stark contrast to the expensive designer footwear scattered around the student lounge area. The receptionist looked up from her phone, her expression shifting from bored indifference to shock as recognition dawned across her carefully made-up face. The afternoon light streaming through the windows seemed to bend around him, illuminating a man whose reputation had been forged through decades of legendary battles. His eyes swept the dojo with the calm assessment of someone who had faced the world's most dangerous opponents in rings across the globe. This was not the dramatic entrance of someone seeking attention. This was the quiet arrival of judgment itself. Students throughout the training area began to notice the commotion near the front desk as whispered exclamations rippled through the crowd like an electric current. "Is that really him?" came from one corner, while another voice carried the awed reverence reserved for living legends. Phones appeared in trembling hands as students tried to process the surreal reality of Manny Pacquiao standing in their dojo. The brown belt, who had earlier questioned Marcus's behavior, now stood frozen, her water bottle forgotten in her grip as she watched the 8-division world champion scan the training floor. Marcus, still holding court near the main mat while recounting his victory over Queen, remained oblivious to the seismic shift occurring just 50 feet away. The afternoon training session had transformed into something unprecedented, a convergence of worlds that would be discussed in martial arts circles for generations. The very air seemed to thicken with anticipation as students realized they were about to witness history in the making. Manny approached the reception desk with the measured steps of someone who had walked into hostile territory countless times before, his demeanor calm but purposeful. "I'm here to see the instructor who was training with my daughter this afternoon," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of authority earned through triumph and tragedy. The receptionist stammered something about getting Marcus immediately, her composure completely shattered by the presence of Philippine royalty. Students began moving closer, forming a loose semicircle around the legendary fighter while maintaining respectful distance. The sound of training had ceased entirely, replaced by the hushed breathing of dozens of people witnessing something they would remember for the rest of their lives. Manny's hands remained relaxed at his sides, but every person present could sense the coiled potential for violence that had made him one of the most feared fighters in boxing history. The late afternoon sun created a halo effect around his silhouette, transforming an already surreal moment into something approaching the mythical. The dojo's carefully maintained atmosphere of controlled aggression and manufactured toughness seemed to evaporate in the presence of authentic power and genuine consequence. Marcus finally noticed the unusual silence, his victory celebration interrupted by the realization that something significant was happening beyond his immediate sphere of influence. He turned toward the reception area with the irritated expression of someone accustomed to being the center of attention in his own domain. The distance between the main training mat and the front desk suddenly seemed vast, a journey that would take him from comfortable arrogance to uncomfortable reality. Students watched in fascination as their instructor began walking toward a confrontation that would define not just his character, but the very future of elite martial arts academy. Manny waited with the patience of someone who had learned that true strength was demonstrated through restraint rather than aggression. The stage was set for a meeting that would become the stuff of legend, a collision between manufactured superiority and authentic greatness that would forever change everyone present. Marcus strode across the polished floor toward the reception area with his usual confident swagger, assuming another potential student required his personal attention and expertise. His black belt swayed with each step, a symbol of authority he had worn like armor through countless demonstrations of superiority. The crowd of students parting before him only reinforced his sense of importance, their hushed voices feeding his ego even as they whispered about something beyond his comprehension. As he drew closer to the figure standing near the front desk, something familiar about the man's profile began to gnaw at his consciousness. The afternoon light illuminated features that Marcus had seen countless times on television screens and magazine covers throughout his life. His steps slowed involuntarily as recognition crept through his arrogance like ice water through his veins. The distance between them collapsed from 20 feet to 10, and Marcus Chen found himself face to face with a living legend he had idolized since childhood. "You must be the instructor," Manny Pacquiao said quietly, his voice carrying none of the menace Marcus had expected, but somehow more terrifying in its calm restraint. The words hung in the air like a death sentence as Marcus felt his knees weaken beneath the weight of sudden, crushing realization. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, the practiced speeches and condescending remarks that usually flowed so easily now trapped behind a wall of pure shock. The students surrounding them held their collective breath, witnessing the exact moment when manufactured confidence collided with authentic consequence. Marcus's hands began to tremble as the full magnitude of his afternoon's actions crashed down upon him like a tsunami of recognition. This wasn't just any angry parent. This was the man whose poster had hung in his childhood bedroom, whose fights he had studied religiously, whose very name represented everything Marcus claimed to understand about combat sports. The black belt around his waist suddenly felt like a noose, a symbol of authority that meant nothing in the presence of genuine greatness. "I understand you had some training with my daughter Queen this afternoon," Manny continued, his tone remaining conversational, while his eyes conveyed a depth of controlled fury that made Marcus's theatrical anger seem childish by comparison. The legendary fighter's presence seemed to fill the entire dojo, transforming the space from Marcus's domain into something approaching a courtroom where judgment was about to be rendered. Students pressed closer despite their fear, recognizing they were witnessing a moment that would be retold in martial arts circles for decades to come. Marcus tried to find his voice, to summon some explanation that might diminish the severity of what he had done, but words failed him completely. The afternoon sun, streaming through the windows, seemed to spotlight his guilt, illuminating a man who had built his reputation on dominance rather than discipline. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he realized that every student, every witness, every person present now understood the catastrophic mistake he had made. The dojo that had been his kingdom moments earlier now felt like a prison where he awaited execution. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, filled with the unspoken weight of what Marcus had done and what Manny Pacquiao represented as both a father and a fighter. Students watched in fascination as their once intimidating instructor seemed to shrink before their eyes, his carefully constructed persona crumbling under the gaze of authentic authority. Marcus's breathing became shallow as he struggled to process the impossible reality that he had physically assaulted the daughter of one of the greatest fighters who had ever lived. The mirrors lining the dojo walls reflected his pale, terrified face from multiple angles, creating a kaleidoscope of fear and recognition. His black belt, once a symbol of his dominance over others, now felt like evidence of his fundamental misunderstanding of what martial arts truly represented. The afternoon training session that had begun with his arrogant demonstration of power was about to conclude with a lesson in humility that he would never forget. Manny Pacquiao stood quietly, waiting for Marcus to find his voice and explain how he could justify putting his hands around the throat of an innocent young woman who had come seeking only knowledge and respect. "Sir, I didn't know," Marcus finally managed to whisper, his voice cracking like that of a frightened child caught in an unforgivable act. The words sounded pathetic even to his own ears, a desperate attempt to minimize what everyone present understood was inexcusable regardless of Queen's identity. Manny stepped closer, his movement fluid and controlled, closing the distance until Marcus could see the decades of discipline and authentic power reflected in the champion's weathered eyes. "You didn't know what exactly?" Manny asked softly, his voice carrying the dangerous calm of a man who had learned to channel fury into focused purpose. The question hung in the air like a blade, cutting through Marcus's attempts at justification with surgical precision. Students shifted nervously, sensing they were witnessing the dismantling of everything their instructor claimed to represent about martial arts philosophy and warrior ethics. The late afternoon light streaming through the windows seemed to dim as the conversation took on the weight of a life-altering confrontation. "You didn't know that choking an unconscious opponent was wrong," Manny continued, his tone remaining conversational, while his words delivered devastating blows to Marcus's crumbling justifications. "You didn't know that a true martial artist protects those weaker than themselves, rather than exploiting that weakness for personal satisfaction." Each question landed with the precision of someone who understood that the most powerful weapons were often words delivered with absolute moral authority. Marcus felt his legs threatening to buckle as the full weight of his actions was laid bare before an audience of his own students. The mirrors that had once reflected his authority now showed only a man being systematically stripped of his pretensions by someone who embodied everything he had claimed to understand about fighting. Sweat ran down his face as he realized that every principle he had supposedly mastered was being revealed as hollow performance. The black belt around his waist felt like it was tightening with each passing moment, a symbol of knowledge he had never truly possessed. "In my culture, we have a saying," Manny said, his voice taking on the cadence of someone sharing wisdom earned through genuine struggle and authentic triumph. "Ang tunay na lakas ay hindi nasusukat sa pagkakapanalo sa iba, kundi sa pagkakapanalo sa sarili." The Filipino words echoed through the dojo with the weight of ancestral wisdom, followed by their English translation that cut even deeper. True strength is not measured by victory over others, but by victory over oneself. Marcus felt the truth of those words penetrating his consciousness like arrows, finding their mark in previously impenetrable armor. Students throughout the dojo nodded unconsciously, recognizing authentic teaching in a way they had never experienced under Marcus's superficial instruction. The legendary fighter's presence transformed the space from a training facility into a classroom where real lessons about character and responsibility were being delivered. Marcus realized he was receiving an education in authentic martial arts that his expensive certifications and tournament victories had never provided. The moment stretched between them like a bridge spanning the gap between false authority and genuine mastery, with Marcus forced to confront the uncomfortable reality of what he had become versus what he had claimed to represent. "You put your hands around my daughter's throat to prove your superiority," Manny stated with quiet finality, each word a nail in the coffin of Marcus's reputation. "But what you actually proved was that you understand nothing about the responsibility that comes with the knowledge we carry." The students watched in mesmerized silence as their instructor was methodically dismantled, not through violence or theatrical confrontation, but through the simple application of moral truth delivered by someone who had earned the right to speak it. Marcus's mouth opened and closed wordlessly, his usual arsenal of arrogant responses completely inadequate for this moment of reckoning. The afternoon sun continued to stream through the windows, illuminating a lesson that would be remembered long after the physical confrontation had ended. Manny Pacquiao stood patiently, waiting to see if the man before him possessed enough character to accept responsibility for his actions and begin the long journey toward understanding what it truly meant to be a martial artist. Marcus Chen slowly removed his black belt with trembling hands, the silk material sliding through his fingers like water as he held it out toward Manny Pacquiao. "I don't deserve to wear this," he said, his voice barely audible as tears of shame and recognition streamed down his face. The gesture sent shockwaves through the watching students, who had never seen their instructor display anything approaching genuine humility or accountability. Manny regarded the offered belt for a long moment before gently pushing Marcus's hands back toward his waist. "Keep it," the champion said quietly, "but understand that it means nothing unless you learn what it truly represents." The afternoon light seemed brighter now, illuminating a moment of grace that transformed potential destruction into an opportunity for genuine growth. Students throughout the dojo felt the shift in energy as their instructor took his first real step toward understanding the difference between dominance and leadership. In the weeks that followed, Elite Martial Arts Academy underwent a complete philosophical transformation under Marcus's humbled leadership and Manny's occasional guidance. The trophy cases that once dominated the reception area were replaced with photographs of community service projects and student achievement celebrations. Marcus instituted mandatory classes on martial arts ethics and the responsibility that came with fighting knowledge, personally teaching sessions he titled Strength Through Service. Queen returned to the dojo as a guest instructor, her presence serving as a daily reminder of the respect and dignity every student deserved, regardless of their background or skill level. The expensive equipment remained, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed from one of intimidation to genuine mentorship and growth. Former students who had left due to Marcus's previous teaching methods began returning, drawn by stories of authentic transformation. The dojo's social media presence shifted from showcasing Marcus's victories to highlighting student progress and community involvement. Marcus established a scholarship program for underprivileged youth, personally funding training for children who couldn't afford the academy's fees while working part-time jobs to support their families. He volunteered at local youth centers, teaching self-defense classes that emphasized protection and de-escalation rather than aggression and dominance. His teaching style evolved from theatrical performance to patient instruction, with every correction delivered through encouragement rather than intimidation. Students noticed how he now bowed respectfully to each person entering the dojo, treating janitors and CEOs with identical dignity and respect. The mirrors that once reflected his arrogance now showed a man who had learned to see strength in vulnerability and power in service to others. His Instagram account, once filled with self-promotion, began featuring student achievements and inspirational quotes about character development. The transformation was so complete that martial arts schools throughout Manila began sending instructors to observe his classes and learn from his example. On the first anniversary of the incident that had changed everything, Manny Pacquiao visited the academy for a special ceremony honoring Queen's courage and Marcus's transformation. The legendary fighter presented Marcus with a framed photograph of them together, inscribed with the words, "True champions are made not in victory, but in how they rise from defeat." Students, parents, and community members filled the dojo to capacity, witnessing a celebration of redemption that had become legendary throughout the Philippines. Marcus stood before the crowd, his black belt now worn with humility rather than arrogance, and delivered a speech about the journey from pride to authentic strength. The afternoon sun streamed through the same windows that had witnessed his fall from grace, now illuminating a man who had discovered what it truly meant to be a martial artist. Queen stood beside her father, smiling with the satisfaction of someone who had unknowingly sparked a transformation that would impact countless lives for generations to come. The story of Elite Martial Arts Academy had become more than a cautionary tale. It had evolved into a testament to the power of authentic strength, genuine humility, and the possibility of redemption for those brave enough to face their own failures. The transformation of Marcus Chen from arrogant bully to humble teacher proves that true strength comes from character, not dominance. This incredible story shows how one moment of reckoning can change everything. What did you think of this powerful lesson? Subscribe for more inspiring stories and share your thoughts in the comments below.